Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's program, Beyond Recycling, Advancing a Reuse-Driven Future. Some of you may have been part of the symposium that we held at the AIA New York in May, and this was part of that session, so we're rehosting it here. And if you did not join that session, then welcome for the first time. So today's conversation will be a dialogue between Dave Benning, aka Decon Dave, and Stephanie Phillips, moderated by me, Greg Benchavango. Dave is the director of the Building Construction Network and owns Reuse Consulting. Since 1993, he has salvaged or deconstructed over 5,000 projects in North America. And most recently, he formed the New York City Circular Construction Network to unite projects in the New York City area that are working towards a circular economy. Stephanie Phillips is an urban planner and policymaker heading the Deconstruction and Circular Economy Program for the city of San Antonio in Texas. Beyond San Antonio, Stephanie contributes to nonprofits and coalitions, including Build Reuse and the International Climate Heritage Network. She is also the co-founder of Circular San Antonio, a local circularity nonprofit, and a 2023 J.M. Kaplan Innovation Prize awardee. And I'm Greg Benchavango, an associate principal at Slate Architecture and co-chair of the AIA New York Committee on the Environment, Material Health, and Circularity Subcommittee. First, we're going to hear from Dave today and then Stephanie. But before we go into that conversation, just to cover the learning objectives, this will explore the environmental, economic, and preservation advantages of deconstruction over demolition, including material reuse, waste reduction, and the positive impacts of sustainability and carbon footprints. We will also investigate the development and implementation of local deconstruction ordinances, along with best practices for incentivizing sustainable demolition alternatives that promote workforce development in the skilled trades. We will identify key infrastructure and policy changes necessary to transition from a recycling-based system to a reuse-driven economy, drawing lessons from cities like Seattle, New York, and San Antonio. And finally, summarize strategies for incorporating reuse into project planning, sequencing, and procurement, including early-stage coordination, material storage, and workforce training to ensure financial and logistical feasibility. Before we hear from Dave, I just want to mention there will be a link in the chat for obtaining CEU credits, so please fill out the form at that link. All right, Dave, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. See it? That would be appreciated. One second. There we go. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Is that showing up, Greg?
It's loading. Yeah, we're good now. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Deconstruction Dave, as he said. So I'm going to turn my camera off to save some bandwidth. So let me just start with this. You know, I love numbers and a lot of the metrics that we, track in our own work. This is one of the things the EPA came up with, which was basically saying in our lifetime, we'll generate about 136,000 pounds of waste. And then from our experience and looking at some of the internet information, the average American home, not including concrete, weighs about 135,000 pounds. So what that means is the average American home, when it's demolished, is equivalent to a lifetime's worth of waste. And we don't want to waste it, so we disassemble it instead, and we disassemble all sorts of buildings. But I just thought that was an interesting factoid. The fact is, we take buildings apart and then we sell the parts. Sometimes that's an office tenant improvement. Sometimes it's a home or a warehouse or whatever is happening. The idea is that we're trying to do this and be able to offer affordable building materials to the public. And We're trying to reduce the carbon footprint of the projects we're involved in. We're trying to save energy. In fact, the studies that we participated in showed that we have that reclaimed materials require 11 to 20 times less energy to quote unquote produce than when compared to producing new materials. So one of the things that strategy-wise, we always think of demand before supply, especially in New York City. Try and build up demand for a product before you get it, and then when you get it, you'll have hopefully a quick turnaround for that material. One way to do that is to create a wish list, which we've done on our website for architects and for the public, where if you need a spiral staircase or you need something, you can request it, and then we will keep an eye out for it and seek it out. Kind of matchmaker scenario there. The fact is, I'm just an intro to what we're doing. We're not doing this in New York City, of course, but we're in other areas. We're not just taking buildings apart, we're building buildings and other products, but we make them out of our own reclaimed materials. And, the theme today is beyond recycling, but we've actually gone, in our, view of it, we've gone beyond reuse, what people think of as reuse, because we're not just seeing that these materials get reused by others, we're reusing them ourselves. So we're rebuilding buildings like the one in the picture here. We're designing our buildings, our structures are designed for disassembly. This building is a modular building. It's in 2 halves, and no glues or spray foam or anything like that has been used, and a lot of screws and so on, incorporated bolts, but we also do reassembly. So we'll take a building apart in such a way that it can be reassembled again. We might remove wood flooring, but we also offer reinstallation of that wood flooring, so that basically we're taking materials out and we're putting them back in. And what that does is it ensures that the cycle is completed, that material is back in use. So we practice industrial symbiosis, where we look at other businesses and see what their waste stream is and how we can use that. And we do a lot more. But one of the things we're really focused on in New York City is workforce development. So we're going to be, having our operation, but we want to expand the entire circular construction industry in New York City by training everyone to do what we've been doing for 33 years. We also plan to be somewhat of a business incubator, where someone with an idea or a student might catch a break from us and be able to start a circular business with us. Okay, and I know New York City wants green-collar jobs. We create up to 20 times more jobs than demolition. So in New York City, though, I needed a unique solution to match what the city was asking for with circular construction. So we started a website with a circular directory. We're still in the final stages of putting that together. It is, of course, not listed here, but it's in New York City. It's nyc-circular.com. And on that site, we're creating a wish list page for to collect demand, and then we have materials exchange page to display supply. We also perform implementation audits, where it's not just an audit of what's in the building, it's leveraging my 33 years of experience to tell you how to get it out of the building or how to reuse it yourself and things like that. So that's happening now. But let's just zoom in here for a second on what we've been experiencing in New York City, what we've been seeing. And you can zoom in or you can zoom out. So we're going to zoom right into a project. We're going to zoom into a material on that project. And we're going to say, what are we going to do with this stone? How are we going to solve that? In this case, it's likely on this project, it's likely that that stone is going to be reused by others. We are going to list it on our materials exchange, and then with the hope of generating a demand for that material before it becomes available. So sometimes we get information, especially when we work with architects, about materials that are coming up before they become available. And so that's our strategy now. Of course, if it gets past us that way, we will then likely move it into our physical location, which I will talk about in a minute. So that was kind of the material level. What about the project level? So one of our projects is the New York Climate Exchange. We did an audit of the existing buildings with the hope of incorporating some of that material into the new buildings that are being built, or any new structure being built, or any new structure on the island being built, or any new structure or project in the city that's planned. So it goes from that. Can we use it in the project? Can we use it on the island? Can we use it in the city? And can we use it in the region somewhere? So we have regional partners as well if we have to go outside the city. So the next thing is that you say, well, that was a project. What about the next level? Well, I'm going to use a great business called Big Reuse in Brooklyn. They're a brick and mortar store. They have an online presence and they have collection services. So now it's not just a project, but they can serve hundreds of projects as we will as we get started in Brooklyn as well. So now we're at the network level, and so that's what we call the New York City Circular Construction Network. And basically, we've assembled a number of people, projects, and practitioners, and they're all working together. Like one project is getting rid of something, another project needs something. There are people that want to promote this. There are practitioners that want to assist with this. And so we are slowly building up that network to support our efforts, as well as the Reuse Innovation Center, which is the next slide. So now the Reuse Innovation Center motto is, we're not here to add to the circular economy, we are here to multiply it. And essentially what it is you might call it a business cooperative, a circular business cooperative. It's going to be located in Brooklyn. It won't look exactly like this. This is an architectural rendering of the idea, but it's going to be a center where we're going to collect materials, hopefully from your job sites, something where you've decided you don't want to see that material wasted. So you contact you contact us and we send out a collection crew. That means they can deconstruct, they can salvage, they can just simply collect it, and they bring it back to the center. And then from that, we will be producing a number of remanufactured products, whether that's demountable panels. We have a prototype for what I guess you would call a phone booth, or a soundproof booth for making phone calls in an office. We'd like to make that out of all reclaimed materials. And we also will have a showroom there where we will display hopefully eventually 50 reclaimed content products, so that if that's something, when you are thinking of circular, we should have a good selection of circular products in our showroom. And we're going to have trainees at every step. We're going to be incubating businesses. We're going to try and achieve 90% landfill diversion on our deconstruction projects, and sell things affordably. So one important thing at the bottom there, you see that there is a fundraiser if you really want to see this happening in New York City, please consider contributing to our fundraiser. And I believe that will be in the chat. So we'll post a link in the chat, now or very soon. So hopefully everyone would, that wants to see this happening would consider giving us some support. So the final slide is that when we look at what we need, and no matter what the community that we're working in, we need time. We need architects to tell us about projects ahead of time. If they need materials, if an architect was to say, I need materials, we need time to find those materials. If they're getting rid of materials, we need time to figure out what to do with them, when and how to save them. So we need demand for our supply. So we need architects to consider reclaim materials in their projects, not just giving us materials, but doing both that and taking in materials from us or purchasing materials from us, so that we can balance the supply and the demand. And it also helps balance the budget of projects. So I guess the important point of this whole presentation is that, all of this is pretty complicated. Getting it started, it's no wonder that no one's really doing it in the city the way we're talking about, the scale we're talking about. But I think if you believe in circularity, you should buy circular. Stop investing all your money in the linear economy and consider investing in us and each other's projects, so that we can in that way we can support everyone's projects at the same time. So there's that fundraiser again. I appreciate your time. I don't know how many minutes that took, but thanks again, and I will stop sharing.
All right, so I am up next. I am going to share my screen. One moment. All right. So it's always hard to follow Dave because he is Deconstruction Dave. He's pioneer in this space. And I'm excited to provide kind of another example of advancing the circular economy in a very different kind of space compared to New York. And then also give an example of what an actual city government can do if there is a commitment to advancing circularity in the built environment on the city side. So I am coming to you all live from San Antonio, Texas. Just some level setting about our city if you're not familiar with it. So San Antonio is the 7th largest city in North America. It is one of the least dense cities, which I think is really important to mention. It's not dense like New York City. It is a victim of suburban sprawl. So that does mean we have a lot of land, and land is still relatively cheap. So just kind of keep that in context when we're talking about our infrastructure that we're handling with the circular economy. Another important piece of who we are is we are one of the fastest growing metros and regions in the United States. So we have a lot of people moving here very quickly, which by proxy has led to a significant amount of buildings being demolished, in particular, single family, small scale affordable housing stock, which I'll hit on a little bit later on why that's important in this conversation for us. And then just some climate pressures and considerations. So I always describe living in San Antonio as living on the surface of the sun. As a Midwesterner, it is so hot here, especially right now. And extreme heat can lead to water and resource scarcity, issues with energy reliability and cost, issues with housing conditions, and extreme retrofit needs to make sure that people are living, quality spaces. And then another important contextual thing for us to mention that differs a little bit from New York is that we do have very limited state level climate support, as some of you may know if you keep up with Texas politics. So there is a real need for the cities in Texas, especially to kind of step up and be creative on how governments can move the needle forward on building material reuse. Despite all of those things, San Antonio did become the largest city in North America to adopt a deconstruction ordinance in September of 2022. We are patiently waiting for other cities to overtake us in that honor. We do have an ordinance that is explicitly focused on residential, which was very intentional. A majority of the buildings that are demolished in San Antonio are residential structures. So we really wanted to focus on taking bite-sized pieces out of the demolition pipeline and really scaling up a workforce to kind of meet the demands of that ordinance itself as we kind of start preparing to move into the commercial space potentially from a regulatory lens. We do have year date thresholds. So if a residential structure built in 1945 or earlier is coming down in anywhere in San Antonio, it has to be physically deconstructed. And if it was or is located in a protected district, like a historic district, that build date threshold goes up to 1960. So kind of edging our way into mid-century modern materials and structures. So if you want to learn more about that policy itself, please check the website. So this is an actual program. The Deconstruction and Circular Economy Program is a city program housed in the city's Office of Historic Preservation, where I work. And these are our broad program areas that our mighty team of two works on every day. So we have a staff member that really focuses on administering that deconstruction ordinance that I just mentioned. So working with contractors, permitting, making sure that forms are submitted, doing site inspections, all of that fun, sexy government stuff. But then we also have kind of a slew of other things that we do to support that ordinance. It's not just about the regulation. There's a lot that goes into kind of undergirding the success of that. And that includes deconstruction workforce training. So David mentioned training contractors. That is something that we as the city are committed to doing at least once every year to make sure that we have a workforce to actually do the work for our property owners that require deconstruction. We also have our own physical infrastructure that we call the Material Innovation Center, which is a slightly different model than the Reuse Innovation Center, and I think is a good kind of city contrast to what we're talking about, which I'll dive into in just a moment. And then we do spend a lot of time with strategic partnerships and community engagement, just because we know that the government can't do something this massive alone. It requires so much actors, so many different people coming together to make this very big undertaking, kind of challenging the take, make, waste model. We got to do it together. So a bit about like how we frame deconstruction. It's a little unusual for deconstruction ordinance to be housed in an Office of Historic Preservation, but that is really kind of framed how we approach this program. And we really like to emphasize that deconstruction is not not a preservation alternative. It's a demolition alternative. So we still work hard every single day to keep buildings standing if we can, because that's the best climate strategy. But we do focus so much on reuse for community benefit, which really kind of influences how our program operates. We want to really demonstrate that recovering reclaimed building materials is a community good. And we want to redirect building materials that come into our possession as the city into community-based needs. So it was really important for the organizers of this session to kind of just like hit on how we got something like this over the finish line and how we continue to expand our program politically. And one really big thing for us was forming a deconstruction advisory committee. We started this work way back in 2018, and it took us about 4.5 years to get an ordinance adopted. But these are kind of our stakeholders, and this has only continued to expand. but I wanted to give like a breadth of those that have been engaged in the writing of this policy. So several public agencies. I always say that our work is silo busting. Like, I do not care what department you work in. I do not care what your background is. Like, if you are contributing in any way, shape, or form to policy or regulation or community engagement around the built environment and waste management, like, you should be at the table. So, really making sure that we engage these entities. We also are deeply rooted in our nonprofit world, so our Habitats for Humanities, preservation, environment, workforce development, all of that. And then our private entities. So demolition contractors, deconstruction, even house moving were part of shaping this policy. Area landfills and waste haulers, even large scale developers that hold a lot of political sway, land use attorney groups were part of this discussion every step of the way to make sure that we were developing something that is specific to San Antonio's needs versus anywhere USA, because obviously the dynamics in San Antonio are very different than New York City. So, kind of the hyper local nature of reuse is really, really relevant to this conversation. And from engaging all of those various diverse stakeholders, we kind of distilled what the goals were of a deconstruction policy in San Antonio into these 6 drivers. And this still drives our work today. And I think this can really resonate with any city, right? Like, maybe your main driver is waste reduction or sustainability and resilience. But we also wanted to emphasize that it's not just about those things, but it's about public health, equity and affordable housing, workforce, historic and cultural preservation. It can be all of these things, and they're all interrelated. So we need to engage the broad spectrum of actors in these spaces. And just to show an example of how that all of that was distilled into getting an ordinance passed, this is an actual slide that we showed our city council when they were voting on the ordinance. And I just like to show people what data does, what culling information about what's happening in San Antonio can look like, to really emphasize that this is a policy that is needed. It's something that can be community rooted and can really benefit a lot of people. So here's this slide. Just a few results, because we get this question a lot. So more than 135 buildings have been deconstructed that would have otherwise been demolished in San Antonio with this regulation. We have an average diversion rate from the landfill of about 60% across reported projects, and a majority of that is for reuse specifically, not recycling or downcycling. So I think that's important context when we're talking about going beyond recycling. We really want materials that you see in the picture here: shiplap to be used as shiplap, siding for siding, doors as doors, windows and windows, if at all possible. And then a stat that we kind of track informally is how many buildings have actually been converted from the demolition pipeline back into the rehabilitation pipeline because of our ordinance. So that actually happens, and we're really proud when that does. And something that I think is really, really important to me and our team is that there's been a real power shift in the local economy from demolition to deconstruction. And what I mean by that is, before this ordinance was in place, several of our active deconstruction contractors would say, I have a demolition contractor that called me. They need to demolish a house, and they're giving me 24 hours to salvage whatever I can before they mechanically demolish the rest of the building. Like, that is a losing game. That's what I mean by power dynamics. And now that we have an actual regulation in place, the power is in the hands of the deconstruction contractor, because they can say, I need all the time that I need to make sure that I'm complying with this ordinance. I need to get everything salvageable out of this building before you come in with heavy machinery, if at all. So that is super, super important. I think it's a great example of how government regulation can be used to advance an outcome that the government wants to see, if that makes sense. Also related to training, which we spend so much time on, we have trained over 175 individuals locally here in San Antonio. The picture you see on the screen was one of our cohorts from last year. And an important kind of stat is, we've increased the number of deconstruction contractors in San Antonio by over 500% from 2019 to today, which means that there are a slew more of area contractors that can do this work or have been upskilled in this work, which makes having access to deconstruction contractors relatively affordable and easy for our general community. So training is key, very important to us. So the last kind of element that is obviously very important to this conversation today is our physical center. An example of how a city is using physical infrastructure to start advancing material reuse and recovery. We call ours the Material Innovation Center, and we refer to it as the last stop before the landfill. So there is actually no requirement in our ordinance that people have to give us the materials that they salvage. We would much rather it be handled by Deconstruction Dave or one of our other deconstruction contractors for for-profit purposes, or to repair another house, or to keep it on site for new construction. But if there is an instance where people want to donate materials or don't want to handle them, they can donate them to our facility for free. There is no tipping fee associated with giving us these materials. And just take one moment, step back. I want to frame why this is done. San Antonio is one of the most economically segregated cities in the country. And from our perspective, we view this work as an extension of general recycling and solid waste management. I do 100% believe that in the near future, or like 5 to 10 years from now, you'll see more and more cities thinking about how they're going to go beyond just waste collection and more about how can we recover not only building materials, but several building materials to recirculate them within our communities to address some of these economic barriers. So that's why it's really key for us. And we can back that up with data. Most of our housing stock that is demolished in San Antonio is older, naturally occurring affordable housing stock. We have a whole report on this, and we really see deconstruction and material reuse and recovery and redistribution as a strategy to help ameliorate some of these issues. So how it works, very simply, people donate materials to us for free, and then we make them available to community uses for free. No pricing. And these are the categories that we kind of match make within. So we connect primarily into affordable housing projects for free. We reroute materials into trades and design education, and then a broad category that we call community impact projects. So here's an example of what that looks like in practice on the ground for housing. So since we have a pipeline of deconstruction projects, that's one of our certified contractors, you can see him lifting up vinyl siding and styrofoam, crazy, to reveal very, very well intact original wood siding from a house built in 1912. We were able to recover that siding, temporarily store it at our facility, and then redirect it into an affordable housing project that was being repaired, basically like a 9-minute drive away. And it had that exact same siding profile. So we use an organ donor analogy a lot when we're talking about this work, that some of these buildings may come down for whatever reason, but their parts and pieces, aka their materials, can be used to sustain the lives of other structures so that they don't fall into disrepair and necessitate demolition in the first place. So this is so much fun. This is such a keystone pillar of our work. We're very proud of it. And this is an example of kind of how we match make across these like government pillars that we have access to. And then another example of what we mean by community infrastructure or community projects. So we are starting to direct some of these materials into what I kind of refer to as ubiquitous infrastructure. Every city has these. Every city has bus stops. Every city has parks, park benches, and shade structures. Why are we relying on virgin materials to build these when we could just harvest materials that are available locally? So these are active projects that are going on in San Antonio right now to kind of demonstrate that proof of concept. And just to kind of conclude, we have a deconstruction ordinance. It's very important, but we do focus so much on all of these other building blocks, quote unquote, that really sustain that regulation. And that really feeds into our conversation today around reuse infrastructure, workforce development, working with architects and designers, and figuring out how a city can kind of play a role in facilitating the advancement of this work. So if y'all have questions, I'll leave this slide up for just a minute or so to take down our contact information, but I'm really looking forward to the discussion with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was great. We're going to move into a moderated Q&A and then leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. I see already we have a number that have come in, and Dave, I see you've answered a few. So thank you, everybody, for submitting those. So just to start, this question is for both Stephanie and Dave. And, it's evident that New York, San Antonio, and Seattle represent very different situations in terms of geography, size, policy, and existing architecture, which play a lot into what materials can be reused and how they are reused and how they're stored. So can you identify some successes that are common to these three places, which could be easily brought to other cities, and also what's maybe unique to the areas you're typically used to working in? I think let's start with Dave, and then Stephanie, if you could follow up.
Well, we've worked in 45 states and 5 provinces so far. And so we don't, we get to see the regional differences, and we also, of course, see just, even in the same region, you could have an operation that's in a big city with high rent, or an operation in a small town with low rent. When we used to run 2 nonprofit stores, our large store was in the small city and our small store was in the big city because of the pressures of that. And so, I think that the one thing is that we have, 200 plus business plans in my head that I keep altering it based on the conditions that we find in an area. So New York City is, one of the most challenging environments for us, but we're confident that we'll find a way to make it work. And, one of the things is our remanufactured products. That might be the solution, where we're adding value to those salvage materials that we're collecting, and finding that works pretty much everywhere we go.
Okay, San Antonio side, because we work so much right now currently with housing stock, I'd say that a big outlet for our materials has consistently been the repair of other buildings. It's low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. When people say there's no market for salvage materials, I say there's always a market for salvage materials if you look at people that own existing buildings. So that's kind of what we focus on currently with our capacity, is kind of demonstrating that that is a natural funnel. So I see one of the questions related to this too, like of buildings being deconstructed in San Antonio, where is the material going and who is buying it? One of my favorite things about deconstruction is that it's kind of a spectacle. If you've never seen it being done before. So when you see buildings being deconstructed in like a dense residential neighborhood, my absolute favorite thing is when people come over to the site, like from 2 doors down, and say, hey, that siding matches my house. I need siding like that. Can I buy it from you? Or I want hardwood flooring to build an addition. Can I buy that from you? So I kind of liken it to, instead of knocking on your neighbor's door for a cup of sugar, you're now knocking on your neighbor's door for a few boards of shiplap. So not only is that getting access to reclaimed materials and kind of creating a microcircular economy, it's also building community. You can't build community around a landfill. So when you're able to build community around the recovery and reuse of building materials that have existed in a community for upwards of, 100 years plus, I think that's just like a natural cascading benefit of prioritizing reuse of materials and really focusing on the end users for them.
I actually really like that sugar analogy. So I'm think about that when I see a shiplap board. So I think it would be good to hear a little bit about how in like how early on people need to be brought into this conversation at the planning level and what's kind of like the startup like both from a financial and logistical point. So can you talk a bit about that for projects that you've been involved in?
Yeah. Obviously, the earlier the better, is always going to be a priority. I think Dave will have a little bit more project experience than us on the government side, but for us, it's almost like forecasting a little bit. The example I gave of like a house being deconstructed on one part of a neighborhood and us knowing that there's another house that is being restored actively down the street requires a lot more logistical coordination than people might think because typically those two pieces of information are not available to those parties. So I think what we're trying to do from a city perspective is kind of interrogate the ownership of that information and make it more publicly visible to people that can, um, benefit from that information. So I say we like poke the bear a little bit, and it's funny because the bear is my employer. It's just a different department. Um, so I think if we can forecast, buildings that are coming down, which we're able to do now with our ordinance, then we can start like matchmaking. That's a term that comes up a lot. Um, a little bit more strategically. And I think this was in one of the questions too, is, something that we love is when a physical material doesn't even have to come to our warehouse. Like that's actually the goal is that we're not temporarily storing something because we've already kind of aligned with other projects and can move those within the city instead of relying on that infrastructure that is still super complicated and doesn't happen often, but that's the goal. So it's really kind of that forecasting and understanding what other projects are happening on the ground that really, really makes it work.
Do you have anything to add to that?
That was pretty thorough. I think, yeah, I know there's all these questions piling up, so I don't have anything to add to that one.
Okay, I think a tangential related topic would be how you think this can be scaled up, because Stefan, you kind of alluded to the logistical challenges and dealing with places that have and need materials within a short drive from each other and kind of connecting the dots. So what kind of methods are you looking at in terms of scaling this up? And I know that this might address also some questions in the chat about like taking on more building stock in San Antonio. And then Dave, if you could speak to this too about scale with the Reuse Innovation Center.
Scale is a big thing. One of our dreams, and this is why I love engaging with architecture community. It's my favorite community to talk to locally, is to talk about like the ambitions of larger architecture firms that want to embrace circularity and what those barriers are. And when we know what those barriers are, we can start looking at how the city might be able to play a role or not. Maybe we're not the best entity to solve a problem. That's kind of where we start is having those conversations and building those connections. For us, barriers to scaling, especially into like having larger building stock of materials or having entering into the commercial space is physical space, funding. Y'all are going to be like, obviously, this is what we hear all the time. And then, scaling up the commercial side of the reuse workforce. I always say, like, I wouldn't feel comfortable legislating that commercial buildings come down without training a workforce that knows how to handle like the heavy masonry buildings that are pretty common in San Antonio for commercial structures, which are very different than the pictures of the wood framed houses without basements that, we deal with now. So more space, more money, more training are our barriers right now, which we're constantly trying to solve.
Thanks, Dave. Do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, we've been hitting barriers since day one, and we call them roadblocks, basically. And just instead of stopping us, we just go around them. We find another way. I think that we are the masters of adaptation. When it comes to our industry, we when you look at all of the businesses we've helped and how they've adapted to different situations, like lack of funding or lack of space, or whatever. And when it comes to New York City, we are planning to start by adapting to the conditions and try and get higher value materials and a lot of raw materials that we can turn into products that architects need. Instead of trying to get architects to adapt to us and our conditions, we're trying to control as many of those conditions as we can to serve architects, and projects where we, if there's a product needed, then maybe we can manufacture that. And the fact that we're manufacturing out of our own reclaimed materials, that's where it becomes circular, right? So that's our plan right now. We also are helping to start a reuse innovation center up the Hudson River in Kingston, New York. So that's another way to scale up. We're talking, with folks in Massachusetts as well. So hopefully we get more of a regional effort going, a network of regional stores that would help us scale up quickly.
Great, thanks. I think that relates to some of the questions. But let's take some questions from the audience. So I see, perhaps let's start with one from Mallory. For the housing stock being deconstructed, is the decon the responsibility of the homeowner, or more broadly, who are the property owners, individuals, public banks, etc.?
Yeah, so I like to kind of normalize, like sometimes deconstruction can sound like flashy and new and crazy. It's just another trade. It's like hiring an electrician. So the responsibility is duly from a permitting perspective on the property owner and the certified deconstruction contractor itself. So what we see, the property owners are very typically individual property owners, but that can mean single family housing owners, developers, investors, commercial property owners, things like that. Sometimes land use attorneys. One of our staff members is working with a dentist who bought some property speculatively to demolish for a new dental clinic. So it runs the gamut of people who own those properties, but it's both on the owner and the contractor.
I think this is probably good for both of you guys, but from Sharon Small, how do reused material sellers warranty the materials if they're not new?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one because a lot of the reuse businesses don't offer a warranty on the materials they sell, but a lot of the remanufacturing businesses that we help start do have a warranty because they're creating essentially new products out of reclaimed materials, so they can control the quality levels and that sort of thing, so they can feel more confident in warranties. But you would have to talk to each business individually about what their warranty is like. The one thing that we always say is don't let something like that slow you down. If you could incorporate reclaimed materials into something where you don't feel like a warranty is as necessary, like perhaps wall paneling, or I'm not sure how to completely address that question, because it's something where we don't want to keep people from using materials, and that's part of our adaptation. You see a company that might that we might help start, that would take wood and create reclaim wood flooring out of beams. Well, they have to be confident in their process so that wood flooring would hold up over the years. So So hopefully the warranty thing, is addressed by, the fact that we're creating these remanufactured products. That should help. And then hopefully there are other items where it isn't as high use or as concerning. So that's all I can think of right now.
So let's take another one from Kendall Christensen. NYC already has a robust set of architectural salvage firms and stores with what appears to be an overstock of products, doors, hardware, windows, etc. What's your assessment of that existing set of businesses and how they would relate to this initiative?
Should I answer that one since I've been to the
I'm sure you
stores?
thought about this. Yeah.
So several of them are my clients from the past, and then we visited others. And basically, what's in New York, a lot of what's in New York City is reuse 1.0, which is our way of saying, you take something and you put it on a shelf in a store and wait for someone to buy it. And then you could say, well, the Hudson Company, they're reuse 2.0 because they mill up beams into wood flooring and things like that you need for your projects. And then we're trying to skip to reuse 3.0, where we are listening to the demand from match that demand or meet that demand through innovative products that we're creating. So I think that our approach is different. We are definitely also trying to do training so that whatever is happening now will hopefully improve the techniques and the strategies and stuff like that of what people are doing. But I know that big reuse, they seem full, but they sell a lot of things every day. So other stores, they have more of a model of, let's sell something for a lot of money and we only need to sell a few a day. That's not our model at all. We're about affordability and volume, because we essentially are getting paid to remove things at job sites where we have a deconstruction crew that gets paid to remove things instead of a demolition crew. And then we get paid again when we sell the things. So we get paid twice. And so hopefully our model, which is proven successful throughout North America, will work here and not replace those businesses, but actually give them a boost. So that we're trying to come up with a model that works in New York City, but it doesn't do so to the detriment of these other existing stores.
Thanks. Scanning the questions here. So I think there's been some touch on this from a few people, but Stephanie, if you could speak to the expansion of the ordinance to other building types, and like what your outlook is on that. Is it commercial interiors, or I know you said large commercial buildings, potentially the whole building would be a challenge, but what about interiors and then also buildings from more recent decades?
Yeah. So our ordinance, when it was adopted, it actually included 3 phases that automatically went into effect as the years went on. We are in the last phase of that ordinance, so any new policy that we take to City Council will require like another robust round of community engagement. I do think that there is growing interest in interiors because there are so many materials that are lost or demoed just from like gut home renovations. So that is definitely of interest to us. We would want to figure out logistically how we could oversee that from a permitting perspective, what kind of staffing would need to be required to make sure that we could control that. But there's definitely interest in both that and moving into newer decades. I would love to see us move into commercial. If you're interested in other policies around the country that do include commercial, I would take a look at Boulder, Colorado, and Palo Alto, California, which encompass all building types, which is so fascinating. So there's definitely precedents out there that we can move into for sure.
Yeah, and I was just in Portland, Oregon. We're getting ready for a commercial deconstruction pilot. And so hopefully it may not come in the form of an ordinance right in the beginning, though. It may be an incentive program, right, Stephanie? I mean, that's one option, where you don't have to take a big bite. You can, I think that if you incentivize, if you had like micro grants or something for commercial deconstruction projects, that would bring that forward. But um, our plan in New York City is almost exclusively commercial deconstruction because it's, that's what we're targeting. Partially not so we don't interfere with the existing salvage stores.
So I think we've got time for probably one more question, and this is coming from Sheetza McGarry. Are there partnerships, and maybe we just consider this question more broadly, but are there partnerships that you have or wish to have with consultants and projects in upstate and more remote locations? What strategies have you found helpful in facilitating the reuse, recycling, and material projects in those areas? I think, Dave, you touched on the potential and future for Kingston to have a reuse innovation center. And I know from previous sessions we've hosted with people like Felix Heisel working in the Finger Lakes that local and regional network is super important. So can you talk about how you handle projects in more remote locations, Dave?
Handle what? The more remote locations?
Yeah, projects in more remote locations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's some news. I've already helped start 7 stores in New York State. 2 in Buffalo, Rochester, Binghamton, etc. So we this is not new to us, of working throughout New York State. And but sometimes like Utica or something like that, we have a project pretty far north of Saratoga Springs, so like we just have places where even that network of stores isn't enough. So we're looking at Troy, New York now, just to try and keep filling in the blanks throughout the state. If you were to draw a 100-mile radius circle around each of those, it would cover a significant portion of the state. But I think that on our website, nyc-circular.com, we do have a materials exchange that we are adding hopefully in the next week or two, and that will be something where we could reach out into other communities and list their materials. It may be too far away to bring to, and of course we're not trying to bring things to the New York City store because we'll have way too much stuff. We want to actually become a supplier for all these other stores of quality materials. And but I think that we still can list things no matter what community they're in.
All right, I just want to thank everybody. I think that wraps us up. I know that the AIA has a hard stop at 1:30 here. So thank you everyone for joining, and please be sure to fill out the CEU form that was linked in the chat earlier in the session to get your credits. And thanks to Stephanie and Dave and the AA for setting this up with us.